So we're going to go ahead and get into the book of Residential Code Essentials, and we're going to address Part 1, Chapter 1, Part 1 Code Administration, Chapter 1 Introduction to Building Codes. So let's begin.
2222, Chapter 1 Introduction to Building Codes. Building codes, in the broadest sense, are the various sets of regulations related to the construction, alteration, maintenance and use of buildings and structures. Sometimes collectively called construction codes, the separate volumes include not only structural considerations, but provisions for fire and life safety, energy conservation and systems for heating, cooling, plumbing and electrical utilities. THSA codes serve primarily to protect the safety and welfare of the building occupants and the public. One in a family of coordinated and compatible construction codes, the International Residential Code (IRC), combines all elements necessary for the construction of one- and two-family dwellings and townhouses into a single volume. Providing design flexibility, the IRC references companion international codes for elements of construction outside the scope of the IRC. TH's chapter Briefle Y discusses the code development process and the scope of some of the companion codes, followed by a more detailed examination of the IRC scope, Figure 1:1. Code development. Construction technology, methods, materials, equipment and processes are constantly evolving. Accordingly, the International Code Council Model Codes (I-codes) are systematically revised at periodic intervals to keep up with technical changes and to address the improved understanding of hazards. The I-codes are revised and updated through an open process that invites participation by all stakeholders and affected parties. This code development process can involve exhaustive research, review, discussion and debate of the potential changes. A code change begins with the submittal of a proposal to add, revise or delete a code provision. Any interested individual or group, other than ICC staff, may submit a code change proposal and participate in the proceedings in which it and all other proposals are considered. Proposed code changes are submitted online through the ICC CDPACCESSTM website, Code Development Process Access. Following the publication and distribution of the proposals, an open public hearing, the Committee Action Hearing (CAH), is held before a committee comprising representatives from across the construction industry and government, including code officials, contractors, builders, architects, engineers, industry professionals and others with expertise related to the applicable code or portion of the code under consideration. This open debate and broad participation before the committee reflect a consensus of the construction community and those impacted by building and fire codes in the decision-making process. The committee may approve, modify or disapprove the code change proposal. If there is a successful motion from the floor regarding the committee's action, then the assembly floor motion will become available for online balloting after the committee action hearing concludes. All members of ICC can participate in the online assembly floor motion votes. If the assembly floor motion receives a majority vote, then the motion becomes a public comment to be heard at the public comment hearing. Once the first stage of online voting Figure 1:1 is completed, the results of the committee action hearing and the subsequent online voting are compiled and posted as the report of committee action hearing, ROCA. Following the availability of the ROCA, anyone may submit a public comment proposing to modify or overturn the hearing results. The next public hearing is the public comment hearing, in which the merits of code change proposals that received public comment are debated. Though any interested party may offer testimony, only ICC governmental member voting representatives, designated public safety officials of a government jurisdiction responsible for administering and enforcing codes, and ICC honorary members are permitted to cast votes at the public comment hearing. Public safety officials have no vested financial interest in the outcome, and they legitimately represent the public interest. Votes are cast electronically at the public comment hearing, and the results are then made available online at CDPACCESS. In the online governmental consensus vote, again only the ICC governmental member voting representatives and ICC honorary members are permitted to vote. The online governmental consensus vote determines the revisions to the next edition of the code. A new edition of the code is published every 3 years. Each I-code is developed during a single 12-month cycle during the 3-year period. There are two separate code change cycles within each 3-year period, with individual codes assigned to one of the two cycles. This important process ensures that the international codes reflect the latest technical advances and address the concerns of those throughout the industry in a fair and equitable manner. The building codes, scope and limitations. A number of features are common to all of the international codes. Each code begins by stating its scope of application. The scope establishes the range of buildings, uses, construction, equipment, and systems to which the particular code applies. The international building, mechanical, fuel gas and plumbing codes exclude from their scope those residential buildings regulated by the IRC. A purpose statement follows the scope and includes the intent to provide minimum standards to protect the health, safety and welfare of the public and the occupant or user of the space or building. Subsequent sections place limitations on the application of the code. For example, each code permits the continued legal use of existing buildings. A building does not need to be brought into compliance with the current codes provided the building does not create hazards to the occupants or property and meets minimum acceptable standards for health and sanitation. In the case of an addition to an existing building, only the addition need comply with the current code, provided it does copyright 20 not cause an unsafe condition in the existing structure. Each international code also references other codes and standards for use under specific circumstances. For example, the IRC references the International Building Code (IBC) for an engineered design of structural elements beyond the scope of the IRC. Finally, the appendices of each code are not in effect unless they are specifically adopted by the authority having jurisdiction. See Chapter 2. International Building Code (IBC). The provisions of the IBC apply to the construction, alteration, maintenance, use and occupancy of all buildings and structures except detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses and their accessory structures, which are covered by the IRC. In addition to structural components and systems, the IBC provides for a safe means of egress, accessibility for persons with disabilities, fire resistance, fire protection systems, weather resistance, finishes and interior environments. These regulations are typically related to the use and occupancy of the building. That is, the IBC assesses relative risks or hazards based on the functions within the building and controls design accordingly. As a result, provisions regulating the building's size, means of egress, fire-resistive elements and fire protection systems vary significantly among sports arenas, hospitals, schools, apartments and office buildings. Figure 1 to 3. International Mechanical Code (IMC). The provisions of the IMC generally apply to the installation, alteration, use and maintenance of permanent mechanical systems utilized for comfort heating, cooling and ventilation, and other mechanical processes within buildings. International Fuel Gas Code (IFGC). The IFGC regulates the installation of natural gas and liquefied petroleum (LP) gas piping systems, fuel gas appliances, gaseous hydrogen systems and related accessories. Coverage includes pipe sizing and other design considerations, approved materials, installation, testing, inspection, operation and maintenance. The equipment installation requirements include combustion and ventilation air, approved venting and connection to the fuel gas piping system. International Plumbing Code (IPC). The provisions of the IPC generally apply to the installation, alteration, use, and maintenance of plumbing systems. The IPC includes the material and installation requirements for water supply and distribution, plumbing fixtures, drain waste and vent (DWV), piping and storm drainage systems. International Fire Code (IFC). The IFC establishes regulations for the prevention of fire and explosion hazards arising from the storage and use of hazardous materials, and it controls other conditions that are hazardous to life, property or public welfare. It also provides for the safety of firefighters during emergency operations. Storage, building use and building maintenance provisions apply during the life of buildings. The IFC also contains design and construction provisions related to fire department access, fire protection water supply, and fire alarm and fire protection systems. International Property Maintenance Code, IPMC. The IPMC provides for the regulation and safe use of existing structures in the interest of the social and economic welfare of the community. It establishes minimum maintenance standards for light, ventilation, space, heating, sanitation, protection from the elements, life safety and safety from fires and other hazards. International Existing Building Code, IEBC. The IEBC intends to provide flexibility and alternative AP approaches in the repair, alteration, addition to, relocation and change of use of existing buildings and still safeguard the public health, safety and welfare. The alternatives offered to the applicant include prescriptive, work area and performance compliance methods. International Energy Conservation Code, IECC. The IECC regulates the design and construction of residential and commercial buildings for the effective use and conservation of energy. The IECC intends to provide flexibility in the methods of compliance with energy conservation requirements. International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, ISPSC. The ISPSC is a comprehensive swimming pool code coordinated with the current requirements in the international codes and the Association of Pool and Spa Professionals, APSP, standards. The ISPSC establishes minimum regulations for public and residential pools, spas and hot tubs using prescriptive and performance-related provisions. International Residential Code, IRC. The provisions of the IRC generally apply to the construction, alteration, use and occupancy of detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses, figures 1 to 3, 1 to 4 and 1 to 5. Such buildings are limited to not more than 3 stories above grade plane in height, copyright 20, and each dwelling unit must have a separate means of egress. This comprehensive, standalone residential code includes provisions for structural elements, fire and life safety, a healthy living environment, energy conservation, and mechanical, fuel gas, plumbing and electrical systems. The IRC incorporates prescriptive provisions for conventional light frame construction as well as performance criteria that allow the use of new materials and new building designs. See Chapter 4. As in the other international codes, the purpose of the IRC is to safeguard the public safety, health and general welfare from fire and other potential hazards attributed to the built environment. The code establishes minimum requirements, reasonably balanced for affordability, that provide strong, stable and sanitary homes that conserve energy while still offering adequate lighting, comfort conditioning, and ventilation. Ref. R101, R202. Dwellings and townhouses. The building height and means of egress requirements of the IRC apply equally to 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses. Although the code generally limits these residential buildings to 3 stories above ground level, this still permits a full basement in addition to 3 stories above, effectively creating a building with 4 floor levels. In addition, the IRC permits a habitable attic, which is not counted as a story, conceivably creating a 5th habitable level, though such an installation is not common, figure 1 to 6. As will be seen in later chapters, structural and other design criteria of the code may further limit the height and number of stories of the building. The code does not limit the total area of dwellings, however. In addition to height considerations, each dwelling unit requires its own separate means of exiting the building to the outdoors. See Chapter 8. Only one exterior exit door is required, and the travel distance to that exit is not regulated, no matter the size or number of stories of the dwelling unit. 2 family dwellings, figure 1 to 7, and townhouses require fire-resistant separations between dwelling units. Limited protection against the spread of fire is also required between a dwelling unit and an attached garage. See Chapter 9. Ref. R101.2, R202. The IRC does not limit the number of townhouses in a group of townhouses but does require the building to satisfy certain other conditions. To qualify as a townhouse, there must be at least 3 attached dwelling units, and each unit must run from foundation to roof. That is, any portion of a townhouse is not permitted to be placed above any portion of another townhouse. In addition, each townhouse must be open to a yard or public way on at least 2 sides, figure 1 to 8. Multifamily dwellings that do not meet the definition of townhouses fall under the provisions of the IBC, Figure 1 to 9. Ref. R. 202, Copyright. Manufactured homes regulations related to manufactured homes appear in Appendix E of the IRC and are not in effect unless specifically adopted by the jurisdiction. For purposes of the IRC, a manufactured home is considered the same as a mobile home, though the preferred term since 1974 federal legislation is manufactured home. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) regulates the construction of manufactured homes, which are built in a manufacturing plant to comply with the Manufactured Home Construction and Safety Standards (HUD) code. Compliance is verified through state or third-party inspection agencies. Each transportable section must display a red certification label on the exterior. Manufactured homes are built on a permanent chassis and are designed to be used as a dwelling with or without a permanent foundation. This design assures transportability for relocation and differentiates manufactured homes from modular homes and other factory-built, panelized, or component structures. Local jurisdictions have no authority to regulate the design or construction of a HUD-regulated manufactured home. IRC Appendix E applies to on-site construction related to manufactured homes used as single-family dwellings and installed on privately owned lots. The provisions relate to the foundation system, connection to utility services, water, sewer, fuel and electricity, and alterations, additions or repairs to the manufactured home. However, any modification or addition must be in compliance with HUD regulations and cannot proceed if otherwise prohibited. Attachment of an accessory building, such as a garage, is generally prohibited unless the design is substantiated through engineering calculations. Factory-built structures that do not fall under the HUD rules are regulated by local jurisdictions like any other building, or in some cases are regulated by a state agency. Accessory buildings and structures. Accessory buildings must be located on the same lot as the dwelling and be considered accessory to and incidental to the dwelling. Detached garages and sheds are the most common examples of accessory buildings, Figure 1 to 10. Workshops, storage buildings, gazebos, playhouses, swimming pool equipment rooms and garden buildings are other examples of structures typically considered accessory to dwellings. Ref. R 101.2, R 202. Existing structures provisions allowing the legal occupancy of buildings to continue without fully complying with current codes are often referred to as grandfathering or grandfather clauses. As with other international codes, the IRC provides such relief for existing buildings. To impose regulations to bring existing buildings into current compliance would be impractical and unreasonable and would penalize owners of buildings that complied with applicable laws at the time of their construction. Of course, if, due to lack of repair or maintenance, buildings fall below the generally acceptable threshold for sanitation, health, safety and welfare of the occupants and the public, the IRC requires corrections in accordance with specific code provisions and the referenced provisions of the IPMC or the IFC. These grandfathering provisions not only apply to the continued use and occupancy of an existing building in the absence of construction activity, they also apply to existing buildings undergoing modifications or additions. Generally, only the modification or addition need comply with the current code. There are some exceptions to this rule. For example, there are retroactive provisions for smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms when work requiring a permit occurs in existing buildings. See Chapters 9 and 10. The installation of smoke alarms, of paramount importance in saving lives, is considered reasonable and practical during construction work on existing buildings. Additions, alterations or repairs cannot cause any portion of the existing building to become unsafe or otherwise adversely affect the performance of the building. If an addition impeded the means of egress to the outdoors, added excessive loading to existing structural members, overloaded the electrical service, or exceeded the capacity of the plumbing drain, waste and vent (DWV) system, then any of the affected elements would need to be brought into compliance with the current code. IRC Appendix J, if specifically adopted, does offer alternatives for compliance with the code during renovation of existing buildings. These provisions, similar to those found in the IEBC, intend to encourage the continued use or reuse of legally existing buildings and structures. Under Appendix J, construction work is categorized as repair, renovation, alteration or reconstruction. As the extent of work becomes greater, resulting in a higher category, the requirements become more stringent. While maintaining an acceptable level of safety, the alternative approaches offer a number of benefits to the owner and builder, such as allowing smaller dimensions for existing windows, doors, stair headroom and ceiling heights without modification. In some cases, certain non-conforming elements in sound condition, such as stairs and railings, may remain without modification even within prescribed work areas. Ref. R 102.7, Cop.